You know what they say, that at the end your whole life flashes before your eyes. Well, since I'm the last speaker of today's panel, I would like to go back for some seconds to the first panel when we were talking, when we were pointing out democracy as a cultural essential aspect. And then later on to the second panel when we were talking about the balance of power and the need to strengthen democracy. So right now in the third panel, after Fiona, I'm going to speak about reforming the judicial system and its impact on the cooperation between states. Also taking into consideration this quote from Margaret Vestager, who is the Executive Vice President of the European Commission, also called by former President Trump tax lady, that I really love. The rule of law is not just something that you sign. It's a living foundation of everything we do. So, looking back at the last 10 years, international focus has been captivated by the massive, unprecedented protests that have engulfed the countries undergoing substantial reform in their judiciary systems. What we are witnessing today in Israel is hundreds of thousands of people marching on the streets, opposing new provisions that could negatively impact the judicial system and its independence. It's a scenario reminiscent of what my fellow Romanian citizens and I have seen in Romania back in 2017 on the same topic. So did the Polish people back in 2015, just to point out another example. The international press is drawing attention to the fact that the protests in Israel opposing the judicial overhaul mark the largest demonstrations since the birth of the state. Back in 2017, the global media underlined that the protests in Romania, generated by amendments to the judicial framework, were the most significant since the revolution of 1989, when the communist regime of the country was overthrown. The fact that so many people have gathered to oppose such abstract and technical legal concepts, far more than those demanding wages or salary rights, might come in as a surprise to many. But the answers provided by the people are an indication of a genuine understanding of the fundamentals of democracy. And I quote, "We are protesting because judicial changes are likely to erode the country's democracy." End quote. News of the manner in which various countries attempt to modify the legal framework regulating their judicial systems circulate globally and determine a chain of official reactions from states that have a close cooperation or from international organizations. That is largely rooted in the perception that such changes can undermine democracy. The process of implementing judicial reform within a state must be handled with great concern and diligence, because the way in which it is done may affect the trust and good cooperation between states. This is illustrated by the similarities seen in the responses to judicial changes in the specific cases provided by Poland, Romania, and in Israel, sorted out in 15 points. There are, of course, cases of other countries that could yield the same conclusions, but the assessment of the cases in the aforementioned 3 countries can be regarded as a first step. Firstly, as I stated before, hundreds of thousands of people all around the countries rallied against the proposed judicial modifications. We are talking about the biggest protests in the current democratic regime of each country. Secondly, these protests lasted for months, which is an indication of the degree in which the people felt that their values have been breached and their determination to fight for what they perceive as fundamental. When asked if a judicial reform is necessary in their country, polls have shown that the majority of people agreed with this statement. From a general perspective, there were expectations from those in power to undertake judicial reform. For example, in Poland, 81% of Poles agree that the court system needs reform. The massive, unprecedented protests came from the concrete way in which those in power opted to address the judicial reform. Opponents of the judicial changes argue that the intention was to erode the separation of powers, jeopardizing the checks and balances among the three branches, all in favor of the ruling parties. Both in Romania and in Israel, protesters accused politicians in power that they had a personal interest in amending the legislation due to the fact that they are facing criminal charges themselves. On the other hand, the political parties in power supporting the judicial reform considered that the changes in the judiciary were attempts to deepen democracy because it would restore the power to its elected officials, since the judges are not directly elected by the people, but still get to decide on essential issues of the country. They claim that the judiciary has too much power and that proposed reforms would in fact improve the balance between institutions. Thus, the changes would restore the citizens' faith in the judiciary. All the points of view stated above, both of those supporting the judicial reforms and of those opposing them, including the reaction of partner states and international organizations, have been widely dealt with in the international press. Both in Romania and in Israel, the presidents of the countries, mediators in such matters, have called for a halt to the legislative process in order for negotiations between parties to take place and a wider consensus to be reached, as the proposed reforms pose a direct threat to the fundamental principles of democracy. Turning to the global repercussions, both in the cases of Poland and Israel, the United Nations Human Rights Chief issued statements calling on the governments to heed the calls of the people and allow the courts to operate free from political influence or interference from external pressure. In essence, his message was that any planned judicial reform should not threaten judicial independence and the separation of powers. All three countries are part of the Venice Commission. In Poland, 2 out of 7 opinions of the Venice Commission regarding the judicial reforms in all these years have been requested by the country's officials. In Romania, 2 out of 6 opinions of the Venice Commission regarding the judicial reforms have been requested by the country's officials. The other requests have been made by the Council of Europe officials, which shows a wide international preoccupation on the potential effects of the judicial reforms on democratic principles. Regarding Israel, there is no request for an opinion from the Venice Commission. One can find only a statement dated February 2023 by the President of the Commission, Ms. Claire Basie-Mollery, entitled "Justice Reform Should Not Jeopardize Meaningful Judicial Review by Independent Courts," in which the main message was that courts should be shielded from political interference and decisions by apex courts should be final and binding on all state institutions and individuals. It is true that the Venice Commission's opinion is not mandatory, and both Poland and Romania's politicians holding power have enacted legislations sometimes prior to receiving the Commission's opinion on that matter. However, when studying the evolution of the Venice Commission's opinion over time, it is frequently pointed out that some improvements have been made following the Commission's recommendations, even if the conclusion is that they do not suffice. It remains to be seen whether the President of Israel or other officials acting on behalf of the state or the Council of Europe will require the Venice Commission's opinion regarding the judicial reforms in Israel in the near future. Both in the cases of Romania and Israel, the United States of America officials have publicly positioned themselves towards the judicial reform envisioned in the two states. Back in 2019, the US Embassy in Romania posted on its official page concerns about the rule of law in Romania on behalf of Austria, Belgium, Canada, Denmark, Finland, France, Germany, Ireland, the Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, and the United States. It conveyed the fear of the impact of the independence of Romania's judiciary, which would undermine Romanians and the partners' trust in the judicial system and in Romania's government as well. This July, the White House released a statement expressing that in order for major changes in a democracy to be enduring, they must have as broad a consensus as possible. And the United States will continue to support the efforts of President Herzog and other Israeli leaders as they seek to build a broader consensus through political dialogue. Let's not forget that Israel's democratic status has always been a cornerstone of the partnership with the United States. Both Poland and Romania faced harsh criticism from the European Union officials. In 2018, the Vice President of the European Commission, Frans Timmermans, has repeatedly called on the Romanian government to renounce its planned judicial reform. The European Commission observed that the autonomy of judges and the division of powers were at risk. It stated its conclusion in the cooperation and verification mechanism just 6 weeks before the country was due to take over the rotating EU presidency, which sparkled a lot of rumors and doubt about the country's capacity to be in a position to lead Europe. At the beginning of 2019, Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker voiced his own doubts about Romania regarding the judicial reforms just before taking on the EU presidency. In the end, Romania did take on this role. What the country did not succeed yet is to join Europe's Schengen zone, which can only be permitted if it adheres to EU standards. One cannot be sure if there is still a link between the concerns voiced by European Union officials and the fact that Romania has not been accepted in Schengen by now. The issues regarding the rule of law, the fight against corruption in between 2017 and 2019, and enacting legislation on judicial reforms in 2022 without waiting for the Venice Commission's opinion multiple times could matter. Today, Romania fulfills all the requirements in order to be part of Schengen zone and should be admitted as soon as possible. Poland, on the other hand, is the first member state to have been found by the European Court of Justice to have failed to fulfill its treaty obligations by violating both the principles of the irremovability of judges and judicial independence, and was imposed daily fines of €1 million for its failure to suspend the Supreme Court's new disciplinary chamber. Also, all the money allocated under the Recovery Fund remains frozen in the case of Poland. When talking about EU member states, respect for the rule of law is a prerequisite for the protection of all values under Article 2 of the Treaty on European Union, as well as the effective application of EU law. This manifests itself in areas as diverse as the function of the single market, the creation of an investment-friendly environment, and the mutual trust, which is the cornerstone of cooperation between member states in the justice and home affairs areas. For example, the judicial cooperation between member states in criminal or civil cases could be at stake in cases such as the mutual recognition of a European arrest warrant or a child custody decision. This is why countries granted EU candidate status, such as the Republic of Moldova, are actually enacting their legislation on the judicial reform of the state in a very close cooperation with the Venice Commission. Other consequences of the massive opposition when talking about judicial reform are the concerns about the waves of immigration. Undoubtedly, it is an aspect that is always on the agenda when talking about diplomatic relationships between states. I attended the protests held in 2017 in Romania myself, and people all around me were discussing whether to leave the country. In the space of just 24 hours, about 1,000 Israeli doctors had joined a WhatsApp messaging group entitled simply Relocation. Finally, Judicial reforms that actually mark fundamental changes to the constitutional makeup of the country contribute to heightened polarization. This type of repercussions are important for diplomatic ties between countries, particularly among those that share a close geopolitical partnership grounded in their mutual respect for shared values. To conclude, even though public attention has shifted in the last years towards the wars going on globally, it is crucial to focus on maintaining the independence of the justice system in each country, because it represents the backbone of democracy, and it is a paramount factor in international diplomatic cooperation. Thank you.